I was sitting on a park bench with my coffee when I saw him. A boy, bigger than the rest, cornering two little girls by the slide. One clutched a teddy bear like it was her last shield, the other tried to stand in front of her sister. Parents kept scrolling their phones, but no one moved. I stood up, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. The air still carried winter's bite, sharp enough that Daniel Brooks pulled his hoodie tighter around his chest as he crossed the park. His breath hung in pale clouds before him, dissolving into the sunlight that had begun to soften the morning. In one hand, he clutched two steaming paper cups of coffee. He balanced them carefully, though he knew one of them would remain untouched, as it had every Saturday for nearly 2 years. He walked toward the bench beneath the tall elm that had become both a refuge and a reminder. The bench had been their bench, his and Emily's, where they used to sit side by side while their son, Liam, shouted from the swings or chased pigeons across the grass. He lowered himself onto the worn slats and set one of the coffees down on the empty space beside him. It wasn't just habit. It was ritual. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the steam curl upward from the cup that would never be lifted again. "Morning, Em," he murmured under his breath. The words carried no expectation, no answer, only the rhythm of a promise he refused to abandon. Liam's laughter rang out from the playground, bright and unself-conscious, carrying across the crisp air. Daniel looked up and found his son racing a pigeon, arms stretched wide like wings. For a moment, the sight lifted something heavy from his chest. Liam was only 7, yet there was already a resilience in him, the kind that children built when life had taken more than it should have. Still, Daniel could see the shadow of loss in his son, the way Liam sometimes turned his head at bedtime, as if waiting for a voice that never came, or how he clutched the old stuffed bear his mother had sewn a patch onto years ago. Daniel sipped his coffee, its bitterness grounding him. He thought of how often people said grief eased with time, as though sorrow were sand in an hourglass slowly falling away. That wasn't true. Grief stayed, but it changed shape, shifting into silence at the dinner table or into the empty chair beside him now. A small voice broke his thoughts. "Dad, watch me." Daniel glanced up to see Liam climbing the jungle gym, his small hands gripping the cold bars, his breath puffing white in the air. "I'm watching, buddy," Daniel called back, forcing a note of cheer into his voice. "Show me what you got." Liam swung himself across the monkey bars, his legs kicking wildly, determination etched on his young face. Daniel's chest tightened with pride. Every wobble, every effort reminded him of Emily, who used to clap the loudest, shouting encouragements that embarrassed Liam but made him glow. Daniel stayed quieter, but he felt no less. The park itself hummed with the ordinary life of families. A couple pushed a stroller near the pond, joggers passed with earbuds in, and the faint bark of a dog carried from somewhere beyond the trees. Yet for Daniel, this place was stitched with memory. The scent of fresh-cut grass, the way the leaves whispered overhead, it all belonged to the years before everything had cracked apart. He reached out, almost without realizing, and touched the rim of the untouched coffee cup beside him. He imagined Emily's hand wrapped around it, her laugh rising as she teased him for putting too much sugar in his. That laugh was gone now, stored only in his memory and in Liam's face, which sometimes, in certain expressions, mirrored hers so closely it ached. Daniel straightened and let out a slow breath. This was his life now, one cup, one chair, one parent. He couldn't change it. But as he watched Liam leap from the last monkey bar and land with a triumphant shout, Daniel understood what he could do. Keep showing up, every morning, every night, until his son no longer needed the steadying hand that Daniel himself had once longed for as a child. He tightened his grip on the warm paper cup, the sound of his son's laughter carrying across the park like a promise he meant to keep. Daniel had just settled back against the bench, letting the warmth of the coffee seep into his palms, when Liam came darting across the grass. His cheeks were flushed from running, his sneakers damp with dew. He tugged urgently at his father's sleeve, eyes wide with a mixture of anger and worry. "Dad?" Liam panted, pointing toward the playground. "That boy's being mean to them." He took her teddy bear. Daniel's gaze followed his son's hand. Near the slide, two little girls stood frozen, side by side. They looked no older than 8. Their hair was the same sandy blonde, tied back in uneven ponytails that bobbed when they shifted nervously. Matching blue jackets made them look like mirror images, though fear painted their faces differently. One clutched her teddy bear so tightly it seemed part of her, while the other held an arm protectively in front of her sister, trying to shield her even though she was just as scared. Hovering over them was a boy, older, maybe 10. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, his stance wide in the practiced swagger of a child who had learned that size could be used as a weapon. Even from the bench, Daniel could read the body language, the sneer, the step forward that forced the twins backward, the hand darting out to snatch the bear and hold it just out of reach. Around them, the park seemed to carry on untouched. Adults scrolled on phones, chatted in low circles, sipped coffee from paper cups. No one else moved. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. An old ache stirred awake. He had been that boy once. Not the bully, but the small one, bracing against words that cut deeper than fists, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. No one ever had. He stood, the decision made before the thought finished forming, and began crossing the playground with long, deliberate strides. The coffee in his hand sloshed, forgotten. When he reached them, his voice was steady, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Hey," he said, eyes fixed on the boy. "What's going on here?" The bully stiffened, but he didn't step back. "Nothing," he muttered, his tone too casual, too rehearsed. "Just playing." "Doesn't look like playing," Daniel replied evenly. His gaze dropped to the bear clutched in the boy's hand. "Give it back." The boy smirked, trying to summon bravado. Or what? For a moment, time bent. Daniel saw not just the boy, but a reflection of the past, himself, younger, smaller, hoping someone would tell the bully enough was enough. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the boy could hear. "Or you'll regret making me come over here." There was no heat in the words, no raised tone. It wasn't anger that cut through the boy's bravado, but the weight of authority in Daniel's voice, the unshakable certainty of a man who would not move until he was obeyed. The boy's smirk faltered. His shoulders dropped a fraction, and with a muttered, "Whatever," he shoved the teddy bear back into the twins' arms. Then he turned on his heel and stalked off toward the basketball court, trying to disguise retreat as indifference. Silence hung for a beat before one of the twins, the one still clutching her bear, hugged it tightly, her eyes wide with lingering fear. The other leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Daniel allowed himself a small smile, crouching just enough to meet their eyes. "Are you girls okay? Where's your mom or dad?" The twins exchanged a quick glance, the unspoken language of siblings, before pointing toward the far side of the park. A woman stood there with her back turned, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp and businesslike even across the distance. She hadn't seen a thing. Daniel nodded. "All right then. You take care of each other." He stood and turned back toward the bench. Liam skipped beside him, eyes bright with pride. "Dad?" he whispered, half awed. "You scared him off just like that." Daniel ruffled his son's hair with a small grin. "Sometimes you don't need to shout, buddy. You just need to mean what you say." As they sat back down, Daniel caught one last glimpse of the twins. They were still holding hands, the bear pressed safely between them. Relief softened their faces, but the memory of fear lingered. That look stayed with Daniel long after he returned to his seat, settling heavy in his chest. He hadn't done much, not really, just a few words. But he knew from his own childhood how much a few words could mean when no one else spoke up. That evening, after Liam had gone to bed, the house fell into the kind of silence Daniel had come to know too well. It wasn't peaceful silence, not the kind where a partner breathes softly beside you or a child murmurs in their sleep down the hall. This silence pressed in, heavy and unrelenting, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and the shuffle of papers spread across the table. Daniel sat hunched over the bills, his brow furrowed as he tapped a pen against the stack. The numbers glared back at him, refusing to bend into something manageable. Rent, utilities, groceries, and then the flyer Liam had brought home just that week, a permission slip for a school trip. Liam had been so excited, waving it in the air, explaining how they'd get to visit the science museum in the city. He'd begged Daniel to sign it right away. Daniel had promised, but now the form sat on the fridge, blank, waiting. He rubbed a hand across his tired eyes. The maintenance job at Westford Technologies kept food on the table and a roof overhead, but just barely. The company had already announced one round of layoffs, and rumors whispered through the halls that another was on the horizon. Daniel's position felt like a coin toss, safe for now, but no guarantee tomorrow. He couldn't shake the image of an email landing in his inbox, cold and impersonal, telling him his job was gone. He leaned back in his chair and let his gaze drift across the kitchen. The room carried traces of Emily Still, the chipped ceramic bowl she had loved too much to replace, the faded curtain she had picked out for the window. She would have found a way to stretch these bills, to make something out of almost nothing. She always had. Without her, the weight fell entirely on him. Daniel's thoughts circled back, unbidden, to the park earlier that day. He pictured the twins' frightened faces, the way one had whispered, "Thank you," and how Liam's eyes had shone with pride afterward. That look had stayed with him more than anything. Not just pride, but trust, a belief that his father would always step in, always protect. Daniel lowered his pen to the table and exhaled slowly. Money was numbers, cold and unyielding. But trust? That was something you couldn't measure, yet it mattered more than anything. A soft creak of the floorboards drew his attention. Liam had padded into the kitchen, hair tousled from sleep, clutching his patched-up stuffed bear. "Dad?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Did you really scare that boy today?" Daniel turned in his chair, softening his voice. "I didn't scare him, buddy. I just reminded him to do the right thing." Liam hugged his bear tighter. "I told Tommy and Josh about it already. They said you're like a superhero." His eyes lit up in that way children's do when they believe something with their whole hearts. Daniel's throat tightened. He crouched so he could meet Liam at eye level, resting a hand on his son's small shoulder. "I'm no superhero, Liam. I'm just your dad. And that's the only job I care about." Liam's grin widened, and with a sleepy nod, he turned back toward his room. Daniel watched him disappear down the hallway, the bear dangling at his side. When the silence returned, it felt different. The bills were still there, the math still impossible, but something in Daniel's chest eased. He picked up his pen again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring: layoffs, debt, uncertainty, but he knew this. His son believed in him, and that was enough reason to keep showing up, one day at a time. 2 weeks slid by after the Saturday at the park. The memory of the twin girls had almost faded from Daniel's daily thoughts, lingering only when Liam retold the story with childlike exaggeration. "My dad scared off this huge bully," he would say proudly to his friends, puffing out his chest as though he'd been the one standing there. Daniel never corrected him. Pride was rare in Liam these days, and he cherished every ounce of it. But life at Westford Technologies had grown heavier. The maintenance crew walked the halls with the quiet dread of men and women waiting for bad news. The whispers in the break room were all the same: restructuring, budget cuts, positions on the line. Daniel did his work without complaint, but the weight in his chest grew tighter each evening when he sat back down at the kitchen table and counted coins against bills. That Monday morning, he was on a ladder in the front lobby, tools hooked on his belt, replacing a bulb that flickered like it couldn't decide whether to burn out or fight for one more day. The hum of footsteps echoed on the polished tile floor below, and Daniel glanced down instinctively. The double glass doors swung open, and a woman stepped inside. Even before she spoke, she carried the kind of presence that shifted the air around her. Her navy coat fell neatly around her frame. Her heels clicked in perfect rhythm, and her posture radiated assurance. She didn't need to ask twice for anything, the kind of person who lived in a world where doors were always held open. Two smaller figures followed at her side, and Daniel's breath caught. Sandy blonde ponytails, matching blue jackets. The twins. For a moment, time folded in on itself, drawing a line from the park bench to this pristine lobby. His mind clicked, connecting what his eyes already knew. These were the same girls he had defended. He froze on the ladder, one hand gripping the light fixture, the other holding the replacement bulb. He almost dropped it when the receptionist's voice floated up from below, cheerful and deferential. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell." Elizabeth Hartwell. The name struck like a hammer. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. The twins' mother, the woman distracted on her phone that day in the park, was not just another parent. She was the CEO of Westford Technologies, his boss. For a heartbeat, Daniel imagined how the moment might unfold. She would glance up, her eyes widening with recognition. She would thank him, Maybe even ask his name. Perhaps speak to someone about keeping him safe from the layoffs that loomed like storm clouds overhead. It was an almost reflexive hope, the kind that slipped into the mind before pride could push it away. But the moment passed. Elizabeth didn't look up. She breezed past the reception desk, her daughters trotting in step, their ponytails swaying. The girls didn't notice him either, their attention fixed on the small tablets in their hands. In seconds, they had vanished down the hallway, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the building. Daniel tightened the last screw on the fixture and descended the ladder. His expression betrayed no disappointment, though somewhere deep in his chest a quiet ache pressed against his ribs. He hadn't been expecting applause, he never did. But the sudden proximity of recognition had stirred something, if only for an instant. As he packed away his tools, he let the thought settle where it belonged. You don't do the right thing for applause. You do it because someone needs you to. That had been true in the park, and it was true now. Still, as Daniel moved on to his next task, the memory of those twins lingered. Life had a strange way of weaving threads together, and though he couldn't see the pattern, he felt the faint tug of something waiting in the weave. The rest of the week passed in a blur of routine repairs and muted anxiety. Every flickering light, every jammed copier, every clattering vent carried with it the whisper of uncertainty. How much longer will this matter if my job is gone tomorrow? Daniel tried to keep his head down, tried to move with the quiet efficiency that had defined his years at Westford Technologies. But it was impossible to ignore the tension that lingered in the halls. Conversations hushed when supervisors passed. The break room was filled with murmurs about people updating resumes, about mortgages hanging in the balance. The fear was as thick as the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. By Friday afternoon, Daniel's stomach was already knotted when his work phone buzzed. A message blinked across the screen. Please report to HR at 3 o'clock. The words sank like stones in his gut. He stared at them for a long moment, thumb hovering as though he could erase them by not acknowledging their presence. HR meetings at a time like this meant only one thing. He finished tightening the vent panel he had been working on, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and made the long walk down to the administrative wing. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should, a march toward inevitability. Inside the HR office, the manager looked up with a polite, practiced smile. A folder rested neatly on the desk. Daniel lowered himself into the chair, bracing for the words he had feared all month. Daniel, the manager began, his tone too carefully measured. We're making some adjustments to the maintenance team. Daniel's chest tightened. There it was, the soft preamble before the blow. He straightened, shoulders squared, willing himself to accept what was coming with quiet dignity. He had no other choice. But then the words shifted. You're being transferred to the executive facilities crew. Daniel blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. I am. Yes, the manager confirmed, sliding the folder across the desk. Effective immediately. You'll be working directly in the executive wing. Higher pay, more stable hours, full benefits. It's an internal promotion. For a moment, Daniel only stared. His mind, so prepared for collapse, struggled to process the sudden tilt. I don't understand. Why me? The manager offered a faint smile. Your name was personally requested by Mr. Jonathan Avery, the Chief Operating Officer. Jonathan Avery, the second in command to Elizabeth Hartwell herself. Daniel had seen the man in passing, sharp suits, brisk steps, the kind of presence that left others scrambling to get out of his way. But never once had Daniel spoken to him, let alone done anything that might draw his attention. He swallowed, nodding slowly. All right, he managed, his voice low, still disbelieving. Thank you. As he left the office, the folder tucked under his arm, Daniel felt lightheaded, as though he'd stepped through a door into a different version of his life. The fear hadn't vanished, but for the first time in months, it wasn't suffocating him. He wasn't losing ground. Somehow, impossibly, he had gained it. A week later, Daniel found himself kneeling in the executive lounge, tools spread neatly beside him as he coaxed a stubborn coffee machine back to life. The hum of the executive wing was different from the rest of the building, quieter, more deliberate, as though the air itself carried authority. The carpet was thicker, the lights softer, the walls lined with framed photographs of milestones Daniel had never been part of. He was tightening the last screw when the door opened. He glanced up, half expecting an assistant or secretary, but instead saw Jonathan Avery stride in. The COO's presence filled the room effortlessly. Tall, tailored suit, movements brisk but precise. Daniel immediately lowered his gaze back to the machine, instinctively making himself smaller. Executives didn't usually acknowledge maintenance staff beyond a nod, if that. "You're Daniel Brooks, right?" The voice was direct, but not unkind. Daniel straightened, caught off guard. "Yes, sir." Avery's expression softened into something Daniel didn't expect. A smile. "Good. I wanted to put a face to the name." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, uncertain. "Did I do something wrong with the assignment?" "Quite the opposite," Avery said, leaning against the counter. "I owe you one." Daniel blinked. "Oh me?" Avery nodded. "My nephew told me what happened at Westwood Park. You stepped in when no one else would. That meant a lot to him." He paused, letting the words land. "Those twins you helped. They're his cousins." For a moment, Daniel couldn't find words. His mind replayed the scene. The bully's sneer, the teddy bear snatched away, the whispered thank you. He'd never once considered who the girls might be beyond two frightened children. I didn't know they were related to you," Daniel said finally, his voice rough. "Of course you didn't," Avery replied, his tone firm but kind. "That's what makes it matter even more. You didn't expect anything back. You weren't angling for attention or reward. Yet it came full circle. That's rare, Daniel. Rare and worth remembering." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. He managed a small nod, but words still failed him. For months he had carried the weight of uncertainty, scraping by, telling himself over and over that doing right was its own reward. To hear someone in Avery's position echo that truth, to know it had rippled into something that secured his place here, was almost too much to absorb. "Keep doing what you're doing," Avery said, straightening. "Sometimes the quiet choices shape things bigger than we realize." And with that, the COO was gone, leaving Daniel standing in the lounge, rag still clutched in his hand, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. That Friday evening, Daniel and Liam walked home together beneath a sky brushed with fading light. The air carried the cool edge of early spring, and their breath mingled in faint clouds as they moved down the familiar sidewalk. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting warm halos across the pavement. Liam skipped along at Daniel's side, his small backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Dad," he said, almost breathless with excitement. "Mrs. Carter said we're going to see the dinosaur bones at the museum. And there's this whole space section with rockets. Tommy's brother told him it's the best trip ever." Daniel listened, smiling softly, the weight of his new paycheck tucked safely in his wallet. That morning, he had signed the permission slip and paid for the school trip without hesitation. It was the first time in months he hadn't had to calculate what sacrifice would make it possible. "That sounds pretty amazing," Daniel said, glancing down at his son. "Think you'll bring me back a picture of the biggest dinosaur?" Liam grinned, his teeth flashing in the lamplight. "I'll bring you two. One for the fridge and one for your toolbox." Daniel chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Deal." They reached the corner where they usually turned for home, and Daniel slowed his steps for a moment, lifting his gaze to the sky. The stars hadn't quite pierced the dusk yet, but the vastness above seemed to stretch wider than it had in years. For so long, every road ahead had felt heavy, narrowing with worry and loss. Tonight, it felt different, not easy, not certain, but open. He thought of the park, of the twins' frightened faces, of the way Liam had looked at him afterward. He thought of Elizabeth Hartwell passing without a glance, of the HR office, of Jonathan Avery's words. "You didn't expect anything back, yet it came full circle." Life didn't hand out thank you cards. It didn't wrap kindness neatly with ribbons or repay it in predictable ways. But sometimes, quietly, without warning, it looped back to you through people you never expected, in places you couldn't have planned. Daniel looked down at his son, who was now hopping over the cracks in the sidewalk, narrating each leap as though it were a grand adventure. His chest tightened with a mix of love and something like relief. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. "Come on, buddy," he said, resting a hand gently on Liam's shoulder. "Let's get home." Liam looked up at him with a smile so wide it erased the shadows of the past 2 years, if only for a moment. Together, they turned the corner, the warm glow of their little house waiting at the end of the street. And as Daniel stepped forward, he felt it, a quiet lightness in his stride, a sense that the road ahead, while still uncertain, no longer felt so impossibly heavy.